You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Welcome to True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time.
Suddenly, out of the darkness appeared Bin Laden.
You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position?
Vengeance felt good. Seeing these people pay for what they'd done felt righteous.
True Spies from Spyscape Studios, wherever you get your podcasts.
Ishtar, a bearded goddess of sex and war from ancient Mesopotamia. She was hot-tempered with a lust for conquest, and her priestesses were transgender.
Oya, Yoruba goddess of the wind, storms, lightning, tornadoes, thunder, commerce, and war. She rules the destruction that comes before positive change.
Atalanta, fleet-footed huntress and heroine of ancient Greece who joined the Argonauts. She helped slay the Caledonian boar and refused to marry any man who couldn't beat her in a foot race. She also became a PDA lion.
Itzpapalotl, a skeletal warrior goddess of the Aztec pantheon, sometimes depicted with butterfly wings lined with obsidian knives.
This episode is part of our Women of Myth series, where we interview podcasters, authors, scholars, and more about the amazing women of world mythology.
It's based on our book of the same name, Women of Myth, illustrated by the amazing Sarah Richard. It's available for pre-order wherever books are sold, or go to ancienthistoryfangirl.com to find links to a bookstore near you.
History is like physics. It informs the world that you're living in.
I'm Jenny Williamson.
And I'm Jen McMenemy.
And this is Ancient History Fangirl.
Yeah, it is.
So today we are so thrilled to welcome award-winning, best-selling author and poet Nikita Gill to the podcast. And her brand new collection of poetry, Where Hope Comes From, is out now in shops. If you don't already have it, please go get it. This is going to drop in February, by the way.
It'll be out.
Hi, Nikita.
Hi, Nikita.
Hi, it's so nice to be here. I'm so excited and pumped about being here. Thank you for having me.
We're so excited that you're here. Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah. So we are both huge fans of Nikita's poetry, her writing, and her activism. And when I read Great Goddesses, I was in total awe. And if you haven't read it yet, just go pick up a copy. It'll be like a great winter treat for you, or summer, or whenever you're listening to this episode.
It's great bathtub reading with a glass of wine, I gotta say.
Or like if you're on a beach and you've got like a cold rosé. But for me, Great Goddesses is this beautiful meditation on the Greek gods and goddesses. It's really haunting. It's fiercely feminist. It's filled with so much insight and, heartbreak, because mythology has a lot of heartbreak. Absolutely no surprise, as a mythology nerd, I was just so bowled over by the research Nikita did and the depth that she brought to these myths and short stories she wrote.
So I was telling Nikita offline, I read Great Goddesses a while ago, and I just read Girl and the Goddess, which has a lot of Hindu mythology in it, because I didn't know that much about Hindu mythology, and I wanted to get that in my brain as well. And I was sitting at the hairdressers and reading it yesterday and getting my hair done and just kind of sniffling and like having an emotional moment and just saying, I hope that the hairdresser does not notice that I am sniffling right now. It's a little awkward, but it was really good.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Can I take you guys everywhere with me? You're so good for my confidence.
We're here to just pop out of bushes and affirm you wherever you are. We'll just be like, yeah, Nikita, do it. You're amazing.
Or just listen to this episode on repeat all the time. We could ad spend.
Exactly. So anyway, the bottom line is we're so thrilled to have you here. This is very exciting for both of us. And welcome to the podcast.
Yay! I'm so happy to be here. This is going to be so much fun. You're both such delights. So I'm really looking forward to this. When I recorded my podcast with Liv for Let's Talk About Myths, Baby, she was actually going to be meeting up with you guys like later on. We ended up chatting for like 3 hours, and we ended up having to cut it short. So 3 hours ended up being cut short because she was going to go chat with you guys. So she was going straight from me to you guys. So I thought that was, that was really, really cool. That we've actually ended up meeting and having a podcast together as well. So exciting, so lovely.
I think the first time we tried to record with Liv, we talked for like 6 hours, and I don't think we even used that recording. Like, we wound up just having to redo the actual recording part.
We talked for 6 hours while drinking, and then tried to record. We were recording something about Dido. It was Dido and Aeneas. And I got real ragey. But also because of the time zones, I'm in the UK, Jenny's in New York, and Liv is in Canada on the West Coast. Like, we're literally spanning like 8 hours. So it's either really early for one person or really late for one person. So every once in a while I'll be like, guys, I'm just tired now. Or like, it's just real early for Liv.
Well, you're in the UK. Where in the UK are you? Because I'm in the UK too.
I'm down in the London area.
We should meet. We should have like a coffee or something. That'd be amazing.
Yes, please. We're hopefully going to Greece, so if you want us to bring you back anything, let us know. Well, maybe. You know as well as I know, Nikita, I may not be leaving this country, but maybe.
Yeah. Well, I've got very little faith in this extremely blokey, patriarchy upholding white supremacy government. And you can quote me on that. I have very little faith in them.
It's all right. I just get real ranty about how, like, my father-in-law has cancer. So a lot of things we're doing, we still have to shelter for him because he's on chemotherapy. And, like, literally the government's like, well, fuck vulnerable people. We don't give a shit. You know, if you're double vaxxed, if you're not double vaxxed, you can wear a mask. Other people don't have to wear a mask. It's fine.
But, like, again, since we are talking about history, if you look into the history of every single one of these, the Tory government, you will see a lot of really messed up shit. Like, they come from long legacies of crappy people, and that's why they are the way that they are. So I do think that there's like a real conversation to be had over there about how, which is, I do this in The Girl and the Goddess, right? The people that inform your existence as a human being. It comes from the past. History isn't a story. It's not. Like, and people treat it like a story. You can just turn the chapter on and it's finished. It's not. History is like physics. It informs the world that you're living in such a deep and meaningful degree. So it's like when people turn around and say, well, why should I be held responsible for what my ancestors have done? And it's like, are you still benefiting, though, from what your ancestors did? Then you should be held responsible for what your ancestors have done because you're still benefiting from it. It is such a simple concept. But, like, you know how we in the UK, we really have some amnesia when it comes to acknowledging our past and really what it's doing. Well, it's happening in the US as well now, isn't it?
There's a whole fight about critical race theory, which is basically just teaching kids that structural racism is real and how that works and how that has affected people of color throughout history and marginalized groups in the US and everything like that, Black people especially. And conservatives don't want it taught in schools at all. They just want this like completely guilt-free, happy experience of school children feeling like America is the best place ever and has never done anything wrong. It's really upsetting.
It's even deeper than that. So the Republicans as well as the Tories, if you, again, look into individual backgrounds, they are the ruling classes. They're the ruling classes in America and they're the ruling classes in this country. And what the ruling classes have essentially done is that they've also manipulated and hurt the working classes and the middle classes. In this country, it's been the working class that they've gone after. And now what they've done is that they've weaponized the working classes, the white working classes specifically, against people of color and immigrants in this country. Because what they're trying to do is keep us infighting amongst each other so we don't turn around and look at what they have done and how they have historically benefited from our oppression collectively as a whole. And that is, again, it comes down to the history of what their ancestors have taught them. This divide and rule thing that is happening across the world right now, like white supremacy's last stand, as I like to call it.
But it's that stratification. It's by keeping all of the lower classes pitted against each other for like the scraps of bread. Then essentially you're not looking at the people at the top who are flourishing and benefiting in ways that, you should be questioning all the time, saying, wait, why are you getting this and I'm not? Like, why am I worried about someone whose life is just as difficult as I am getting something they deserve that I also deserve? Like, why can't we go to you at the top and say, please, can you just make a more fair system? Isn't that what you're supposed to be doing?
Or don't say please, just snatch it.
Sorry, I find it very hard. I'm either too aggressive as an American or too apologetic.
If you go all the way back, you can look at the Western canon of Greek mythology and find traces of this there, like justifications for it there. And that would tie into a really good question for you, Nikita. Like, have you seen that in your research? Because I definitely can see threads of that in a lot of your work.
Yes. Yeah, it's the concept of, it's really interesting, right? So for me, one of the things that I saw in Greek myth and in Hindu myth is this concept of our betters. I hate that phrase, our betters. And we see it being used today when it comes to like the ruling classes and like the royal family, our betters, which directly stands against everything that I am as a human being and as a feminist. The concept of people openly saying that these people are our betters is like, it's basically turning around and saying that, I'm very happy being oppressed and dominated and told that I am less than. I saw it in Greek history that the concept of there was this very clear hierarchy from slave to like, I guess in my head, I keep thinking of them as senators because that's what they like walk around with the big white robes and everything. They're the ones that get to talk about art and they're the ones that have the massive houses and everyone else is working for them. And it's brutal because that system, it reminds me very strongly of something that we have in India, which is the landowner system. So zamindars. And zamindars are basically very similar to what it was in Greece of, these very wealthy men who had all of this. They had these massive houses, they had fields and fields, they had 100 slaves, 1,000 slaves. In fact, your how high up you are is also determined by how many slaves you have, which I found like quite disturbing. Like, how many people are you oppressing? That puts you higher in the hierarchy of rich, powerful men. So here's the landowner system in India and how it works, basically. And this is something from way back in the day. Especially in the rural villages, this system still exists where like you have like a zamindar or like who's usually known as like a thakur or someone who's like a very wealthy man. And he has like loads of people working for him for a pittance. It's almost like indentured servitude, if not outright. You have to pay off your debts or something like that to this person. It really reminded me of how historically we have had so many people like who are like that. And it always comes down to wealthy men who are born into their wealth, which is how like, generational wealth is accumulated. So generational wealth, it is probably one of the things that I have identified very clearly as the thing that makes people act a certain way. People act with like that sense of security that nothing can touch me. And that's the thing which I keep seeing over and over and over again when I'm researching. The idea that you can act this way because no one or nothing can ever touch you.
Oh, that is absolutely at play in Greek mythology.
Zeus is such a great example of power wielded wrong, that he can just get away, do anything with and do anything to any woman, any person. So many of the male gods are like that, Rape is such a common theme in Greek mythology.
It just happens over and over and over again, and I remember as a kid reading these myths. Like my mom was the local librarian, and there were, books of different kinds of mythology, and I just devoured all of that as a kid and not really realizing what the euphemisms about like kidnapping, and this god sees this woman from afar and falls in love with her and sweeps her away. And in some cases, it's actually presented romantically, and not really realizing until I was a lot older what that really meant.
The only one that I ever remember seeing presented as like pretty awful was Apollo and Daphne. Like literally every other sort of abduction or absconding or swept away is like there, as a kid growing up in the 80s and early 90s, was like there was a romance to it. They get to like have this little affair with this god who's like, oh, isn't that wonderful? The only one that I've ever seen portrayed in a negative way is Apollo and Daphne. because she desperately is like, no, I do not want to be a part of whatever it is. You are selling Apollo. Please get away. So it's really interesting. And I find that it's only been, for me, in the past maybe 10 years that we start reclaiming those narratives and calling that exactly what it was, and making sure that the stories and the way in which we are bringing it to the new generation includes probably exactly the way the story would have been told, I think, in ancient times, because this was a common thing that happened to women. And these stories would not have been as romanticized as they were by gentlemen scholars and children's writers when we were particularly younger, like softening them. I feel like there was a lot of like, we must soften these stories for children. But historically, children's stories were not soft stories. Fairy and folk tales, which came down and became eventually, like in the 19th century golden age of sort of like children's literature and stuff, they became softer because children couldn't handle it.
It's true. It's a funny thing because yesterday I was giving a talk about fairy tales and archetypes, and how archetypes are influenced by real life and what those archetypes represent in fairy tales. And mythology is very similar, isn't it? Like the reason why they've written about Zeus the way that he is because he's based off, whilst it's religion, everything that we have on this planet is on some extent, at least when it comes to our literature, our religion, it's man-made. It's been created, and it's been created in the impression of the time that has existed. So of course, like you would see, the reason why rape is such a common theme in Greek mythology or in most mythologies is because people treated women's bodies like they were, or people's bodies, especially people who are of the lower classes, women specifically, like we didn't matter, like our bodies didn't belong to us. Our bodies were made to be colonized by men, specifically by wealthy men. And we had nothing that we could do to like stand up for ourselves or speak up for ourselves, and that theme comes up again and again and again. And today we kind of like, we have movements which are kind of like, the Me Too movement, trying to protect women, things like that. And how quickly was that movement turned against us?
Oh, it was weaponized so quickly.
Oh my God, like, aren't we just going too far? Aren't we going to alienate people? Like, it's okay to call out Harvey Weinstein, but what about this other thing? That's just not fair.
I mean, my favorite was when men were like, or not men, when some men, and I remember having arguments with different men I knew, being like, but this doesn't happen to everyone. And I was like, do you want me to give you 7 different examples of this in my life? Or this happening to someone in my life who didn't tell you about it, because we don't talk about this. It happens all the time. Whether you're beautiful, whether you're young, whether you're old, whether you're thin, whether you're overweight, it doesn't matter.
I feel like a lot of our work on Fangirl, like our meta work, we look at ancient history, we look at ancient mythology, we are in a very Greco-Roman space right now. We'd like to expand our horizons. But I feel like a lot of what our work has turned out to be, like how I feel about what I'm doing on a meta level, is that I'm basically kind of mucking around in the foundations of the patriarchy and figuring out exactly what makes it tick. For example, women are set against other women. This isn't just about women. This is about, people of lower classes being set against each other too. And it absolutely applies to colonization and classism. But just talking about the sexism bit of it, like women set against other women, really rigid gender roles, and the depiction of women's independent sexual agency is like a destabilizing force, which I see a lot in myths. I wanted to talk to you about that. Is there anything that you've noticed in Greek mythology that has been really illuminating to you about how patriarchy functions on a basic level?
It's really interesting with Greek mythology specifically because they don't even hide the way that patriarchy functions in Greek mythology. They just don't. In Hindu mythology, there's a lot of connections to karma and dharma and like what your duty is as a human being to the various relationships in your life and how that correlates to getting to Swarg, which is heaven. It's written in such a way that it's all about you as a human being and what your duties are. So it doesn't focus as much on the misogyny. So misogyny is a bit hidden. But when it comes to like Greek culture back in that time, I remember someone actually told me who is Greek and who was studying Greek mythology and like kind of ancient Greek history. She's like, our men used to hate us so much that they used to also prefer to sleep with other men because they hated women so much. And I don't know how much truth there is to that, but the fact that she even felt like that, studying the work that she was, kind of made me look back at it and go, oh my God, so they valued men to the level that they would also take them as, because people have this idea that all of antiquity was gay. I wish it was. I wish it was. It's a lovely thing to hope that all of antiquity was gay.
That's a beautiful, beautiful thought, sweet summer child,
It is sweet summer child. It's a lovely thing to assume, but it wasn't, because they didn't see what they were doing as gay or straight. When men slept with men, they didn't see it like that. But also, there was a visceral hatred of women. They didn't, and you can see it in the way that even the goddesses are treated. And that's why they kind of talk the way that they do, because I have a fear, and it actually correlates with this. I have a fear of men's anger. And a lot of women I know have a fear of men's anger. And there's a real visceral fear of like when men start disregarding your boundaries. And men's anger, even in like Greek mythology, you can see what it can do. Like when it comes to women's anger, it's treated like, oh, she was petty and that's why she got angry. And it's kind of treated like a bit of a joke, like, oh yeah, Hera's like that. She just gets really jealous and angry or whatever.
And, women's anger is lethal against other women in Greek mythology, but never, it's rare that you see women, female goddesses, I'm talking especially, aren't allowed to retaliate against male goddesses for the things that they do. So they go after, the women who are their victims most of the time.
No, they do. And this all comes down to the fact that, so Hera is supposed to be second in charge next to Zeus, right? She's a very powerful goddess when it comes to the hierarchy, the established hierarchy of Olympus. There is an entire myth about how she had had enough of him, and for the first and only time, she decided to host a mutiny against him. It's powerful because she goes and she tries to get all the other gods together. She gets them on her side. They all go and they kind of try to take down Zeus. It's all done so cleverly by her. Orchestrated. She's a very clever goddess. And he has one of the hecatonkers.
The hecatonkers are the 100 hands.
They are of the 100 hands, aren't they? They're the first children of two of the oldest gods. So Gaia and Uranos. So Gaia, who is the mother of the earth, and Uranos, who is the sky, who are two primordial gods. And the hecatonkers are their firstborn children, or no, they are their lastborn children, and they are so ugly, basically, because they're 100 hands and they're considered the monster children of Uranos and Gaia, that Uranos takes them and throws them into hell. That's one version of the myth. He does many things. Like one version says that he actually sees them and he gets so put off by them, basically, that he tries to shove them back into Gaia's womb. And then she has to carry them and be in pain, until they are released. And there's a whole story about this. The hecatonkers are released by Zeus, whether they're in Tartarus or whether they're in Gaia's womb. Zeus actually releases them during the Titanomachy, which is like the 10,000-year war between the Olympians and the old gods, where the Olympians win. And because they owe Zeus that debt, when that mutiny is hosted by Hera against Zeus and the other gods come in and take him down, they chain him up and they're like, not going to release him. One of the hecatonkers comes out and releases Zeus, and the punishment for Hera is terrible because she's hung from the sky. It's awful. She's kind of just left there. It's awful what is done to her, and she never ever rebels against him again, ever, because of the fear of what he did to her that one time. It's such a brutal punishment that he gives her as well. He hangs her from the sky and he leaves her there to like weep and cry. And we don't know how many millennia, how many decades, because gods live forever, that she was just left there as a punishment.
Watching everything he just got up to and did, and everything going on around her with absolutely no power. And what fascinates me about this is if you think about all of the mythology leading up to Zeus becoming the king of the gods, like how did Zeus become the king of the gods? Well, his dad overthrew his father at the urging of his mother. So like you go back through this history of sort of the second female in command, the second most powerful being, convincing the next most powerful being to overthrow them. So I think there is this fear that a woman with that much power and that much ability to wield it, even if that power is through suggestion, can topple everything. Because that's what happens when Cronus cuts off Uranus's bits, that castration phone that made Aphrodite. And then Cronus comes into charge. He's like, I'm going to be a good guy. It's going to be a good time. And there are some theories that for a bit it was a good time. And then he got a prophecy saying his kids would overthrow him. And he's like, well, just eat them. And then they can't do that.
I think that's another running fear that you see in the myths is the idea, if you're the top number one guy, the fear of the woman who is your number two working with somebody else to betray you.
Particularly your son.
Well, I'm just seeing this in the Minos myth that we talked about in our last interview with Jenny Saint. There's this chilling story that she told us where Minos, the king of Crete, there's a story about how he invaded somebody's kingdom and the daughter of the king helped him because she fell in love with him and he appreciated her help and took it and then tied her to the back of his ship and drowned her on his way out because she had betrayed her father because she went against the patriarchy and wasn't trustworthy.
Yeah, it's holding women. It's what happened to Medea. The thing with Medea is she's not the kind of woman you want to do something like that to. But like at the end of the day, she also betrays her father for Jason, to help Jason. And how does Jason repay her? By finding a younger model.
A younger, not foreign model, because xenophobia.
Yeah, xenophobia as well is so big in Medea's story. But yeah, like again, that's a woman who they fear because she's out of their control. Because if she can betray the patriarchy, then she can betray it. Again, that informs the atmosphere we have today. It's something that really scares me when I see the way that sexual assault victims are treated. Because 50 women can come forward about the same man. 100 women.
It takes like 50 women to get a guy like that locked up, and then he gets out on a technicality.
They still let him out of prison, but they won't let Britney go. They won't let Britney take that IUD out. She has to go to court for it, and they still won't let her.
So we talked about Greek mythology and the sort of underpinnings of patriarchy that we see very obviously in Greek mythology. And you mentioned Hindu mythology and how it's more veiled. Can you tell me more about how women are depicted in Hindu mythology and what that can tell us about the patriarchy in that culture?
So Hinduism is extremely interesting as a religion because it's a very complex religion. Like it's not quite like a lot of other religions where you can read one, but we have like one text, one book, and that book it's not a single book kind of religion. It has, I think roughly so far, I've read like 6 different books. So there's the Upanishads, there's the Puranas, there's of course the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and then there's the Gita, which is like born from the Mahabharata. So there's an accumulation of texts which you have to study to really understand the concept of Hinduism, because it's a very deep concept of balance that creates this religion. It can be very like old school and ancient and old fashioned in that sense that there's the masculine and there's the feminine. And both of those energies have to coexist in balance with each other. So on the face of it, it looks like that this is a very humanist religion, right? Because of course, there's like the male gods and the female goddesses. They exist in a majorly equal scale in many ways. Like, so Shiva has Parvati, and Parvati is the goddess of love, and Shiva is he's the god, he's the destroyer god, so they balance each other out. So our Trimurti has a Tridevi. So there's like our 3 main chief gods have a Tridevi, which are our 3 main chief goddesses. And we believe that there is an entire theory in Hinduism that believes that the entire religion was actually created by a goddess. It all came from a goddess, very much like Greek mythology. Chaos is identified often as she and her, which is very fascinating. So chaos and like the Devi have a lot in common that way. So the Devi is very much like the mother to us all, the personification. And so that theory I find very interesting in Hinduism. But again, a lot of Hinduism talks about balance. So we have to have gods of destruction alongside gods of creation. So every now and then, like Shiva destroys the world because evil has become imbalanced with good, or good has become imbalanced with evil. Like there's too much good, literally flips a switch, and destroys the entire universe. And like then Brahma has to rebuild, because Brahma is the creator, the main creator of the universe. He has to rebuild the entire universe again. And then Vishnu is the preserver. So he tries to preserve that balance within the universe. So it's a very delicate structure, but neither good nor evil can outweigh each other according to Hinduism. And that is really fascinating because all other religions talk about goodness, goodness, goodness being like the most important thing. But Hinduism talks about the necessity of evil, like the reason why evil exists. And that's really interesting. So a lot of the religion is dedicated to your dharma as a human being. It is expected in a lot of ways that you will make mistakes and do bad things, right? But you have to learn from those mistakes and become better. Like that's the whole point of existence, of living. And it's why the Hindu gods reincarnate so much, because they are paying off the price of their own celestial burdens. These are what we call karmic cycles. They have to be reborn, because they're reborn in every age to teach us something as human beings, but also learn something themselves. So our gods are not above learning.
That's fascinating. I'm so fascinated by this. How's women's sort of power and agency represented in Hindu mythology?
So this is where it gets interesting, right? Like I said, there's a more veiled sort of misogyny. And when I say this, it's particularly displayed in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, right? So the Ramayana, the story of the Ramayana specifically is the one that I keep turning to. And you saw a bit of this in The Girl and the Goddess yesterday, if you read it. It's a story of the Great War, well, the two great wars our gods basically had. The Iliad really is how I would kind of see the Mahabharata, but it's such an intense, huge book that's kind of hard to kind of put it. And I would say the Ramayana sort of resembles the Odyssey, because there is like one character who goes on a journey, sort of like, so the archetypes and the blocking of the story are similar. But what basically happens in the Ramayana is that there is a prince, basically, and it's a very long story, but to break it down, there is a king, he has 3 wives, because it's very normal back in the day for kings to have 3 wives. Of course, the youngest wife is treated with the most respect and love because she's the youngest wife. Again, misogyny. That's how it works. And our gods also have multiple wives. They have multiple wives. And as much as people can try and say that, oh yeah, it's a very enlightened religion, and why do the gods have multiple wives? There's only one woman in all of our mythology who ends up having 5 husbands. And that was an accident.
Ooh.
So I'll put the Ramayana aside for now because these are very big books. So this is part of the Mahabharata, and it's the story of Draupadi. As all good stories start, it starts with a friendship, and the friendship is between the son of a king and the son of a guru, like a teacher, like one of the wise old teachers, our holy men. Our kings used to basically send their sons to an ashram. An ashram is like where the guru used to live, like this holy man used to live. And then that man used to kind of teach these boys, things like meditation, how to be a warrior, maths, science, writing. Like they used to turn these young princes into kings. That was their duty as holy men. And of course, like there was a hierarchy to that as well, like which holy man you could go to. And all of these holy men, which is strange because they are supposed to be holy gurus, teachers, a lot of them were really fabled warriors. So they were the kind of warriors that the gods had given gifts to, And so that's really interesting, where they weren't just priests or holy men or teachers. They were a multitude of things. This particular story actually starts with the son of a king and the son of a guru becoming really close friends. Now, the thing is, the son of a king is materially very rich, whereas the son of a holy man, teacher, guru, not rich, not wealthy in other ways. Right? That's what we like to say, wealthy in other ways, wealthy in intelligence, wealthy in like being great warriors, wealthy in all of those things. Now, Draupad, who is the son of this particular king, and Drona, who is the son of the guru, become very close. And they're both in the same ashram learning because it's Drona's father who's teaching Draupad how to be a king. And in the ashram, everything is the same. There's a lot of equality there. Everything has to be taught in the same way. Everyone eats on the floor together. There's no hierarchy. Right? So obviously these boys become very close. And what happens is, as Draupad is old enough and he leaves, now mind he's grown up with Drona from a very early age, he says to Drona, I don't want inequality to come between us now. If you come to me, I will give you half my kingdom. I will give you half my kingdom because you're my friend, and I love you. And of course, Drona takes what his best friend, his comrade, his, brother has basically said to him and says, that's, okay. And he never really thinks about the fact that he might have to, because he's focused on becoming like his father, like a teacher, great warrior, the greatest there's ever been. So he doesn't ever think about it. But then as time goes on, Drona's very poor and he marries and he has a child. And one day they see this boy being made fun of. Like all the other children are wealthy enough to drink milk. It's something so small. Drona's son says, what are you drinking? And basically, like these boys say, oh, we're drinking milk. And he says, oh, what's milk? And what they do is they take rice powder and they mix it with water and they give it to this boy to drink. And his father's watching this whole thing happen. And then they make fun of him for drinking it because they're like, that's not milk. What's wrong with you? You've never had milk in your life. And they make fun of him, which is very, very sad for a father to see, that he wasn't able to provide his child with something like milk. So Drona remembers that his friend told him a long time ago that I will give you half my kingdom. So to make his family comfortable, he goes to Draupad and he says, look, you promised me this. And Draupad, by then, obviously wealth has corrupted him. He throws Drona out, his family out. His wife, his child, he just in a very unceremonious way, he says, I don't know who you are. Completely rejects him and throws him out, which is very heartbreaking for Drona, who saw him as his brother. And this was a promise. But Drona is but he doesn't let it destroy him in any way. He decides to get revenge. So it's vengeance that he goes out. He says this, because it wasn't just about him. It was about his wife and child being treated that way, right? That's one way to get under the skin of a man, is to treat his family like shit, because it lowers his prestige in the eyes of his family. So it again connects to patriarchy in a lot of ways. So that's how the psyche works.
It sounds all nice until you look at it that way.
It sounds like, oh, he's protecting his wife and child, until you realize where it all comes from and you realize the psyche. So the story, like it goes that basically Drona becomes a very, very well-known teacher, like in the hierarchy of like the great teachers, Drona becomes the greatest one to send your child to. And then, of course, like what essentially happens is that Draupad doesn't really have children himself at all. So obviously he doesn't, because he's struggling to have children. And obviously in my head, I keep thinking that's the universe and the like the gods basically going, you don't deserve progeny if you treat people that way, kind of thing. But that's never explicitly said. But what happens is that there's another story to this, because again, like Greek mythology, everything is interconnected myths. But the Kuru princes, who are like 100 sons of a king, and the Pandavas, who are his brothers, this king has a brother who's also a king, his 5 sons. So there's 5 princes who are called the Pandavas, and there's 100 princes called the Kaurav princes. Right? They all go to Drona to study. And Drona basically tells, as a final, like he's trained these boys and everything, as a final task, he says to them, you must kidnap and bring Draupad to me in chains. That is your Guru Dakshina. So your Guru Dakshina is like the thing that you pay back to your teacher. They can ask you for anything and you must deliver it. And that's the tuition fee they basically take for being your teacher. And that's your Guru Dakshina. And he says, you must.
It's like your final thesis, really.
It's a bit more than that. Like, well, my mother was a teacher, and I kind of think about the way in which we treat teachers in Western culture. We don't ever think we owe teachers anything for the knowledge and stuff that they impart on us. And I don't know, it's kind of nice to think like there's this idea that maybe we gave a little more respect to some teachers.
Right. But this is what basically happens then in the story. So the Kauravas try, they fail. Then the Pandavas go, and the Pandavas succeed. I'm not going to get into the whole war or anything, but the Pandavas succeed, and they bring Draupad in chains. And Draupad basically, is like very, very humiliated. He's a king. He's been brought in chains in front of this, what he sees as just a teacher. Drona turns around and says, you do remember me. You know exactly who I am. And Draupad says, what are you going to do with me? He says, I'm going to be kinder to you than you were to me. I only want what you promised me, which is half your kingdom. So Draupad has to give over half his kingdom. But now Draupad gets vengeful. And now Draupad doesn't have children, right? So he goes to every single one of his major advisors and his the holy men in his land. And he basically says to them, I need children. I don't care how I get them, but you must give me children. So what happens is there's this massive, like all the holy men, they do this like massive, I don't have the word for it in English. It's basically like a big prayer that they do to the gods where they beg the gods for what this man wants, which is children. And from the fire, because it's a huge fire, after many, many prayers done by like all the major holy men in Draupadi city, two figures emerge. The first is a woman, beautiful woman, dark-skinned woman, who we call Draupadi. She's named after her father. And he's very disappointed because it's a girl. That's not what he wanted. He wanted his revenge, and he believes his revenge can only be delivered by a man. So he's like, I can't have revenge with a girl. What is this? It's a girl, basically. So the first experience Draupadi has, who's born fully formed, like as a teenage girl, basically. And then he's very happy because right behind her is her brother, who he sees as like the guy who will, bring him his revenge and like take everything down and everything. The interesting thing about all of this is that, and this is how Draupadi ends up with her 5 husbands, is that there's a series of things that happen, and like princesses are supposed to have something called a swayamvar, where many, many princes come and vie for the hand, and they're given a series of tasks, very much like the Odyssey. And obviously Draupadi is of marriageable age, and Draupadi is like convinced that I really, really want her to marry someone who will benefit me in this war, which I'm going to go against, like the Pandavas and the Kauravas and Drona. And what happens is there's a bow. There's a whole story, and there's a fish in a barrel and you have to shoot it, and no one's able to do it, basically, other than this boy who's arrived with a few other boys, and they're dressed very simply in like muslin cloth and everything. As a very handsome young man, like again, very dark-skinned, handsome young man who goes and he's able to do it very easily. Like you have to shoot like that without looking and hit this fish in the eye, basically, which is what the thing is. It's a fake fish. It's not a real fish, so don't worry.
I was going to say, I feel a bit bad for the fish. I mean,
no, it's a fake fish.
The reality is the fish is out of water at this point in time, so it is probably dead. Like any way you look at it.
Yeah, it's up on the ceiling.
Oh, I thought it was in a barrel. Oh, okay.
It's up on the ceiling.
That explains why this is hard. Okay, gotcha.
This is all very hard. And anyway, so and it's revealed that the prince is Arjun, who's one of the Pandav brothers. He's the middle brother, and he gets Draupadi's hand. So the enemy has basically ended up winning over the woman. They're very angry. Obviously, Draupadi is furious. He's like, what the hell? These are the people that, kidnapped me and took me in chains to Drona. But anyway, Draupadi goes home with them, and what's happened is they've been exiled. Again, another story. And they're like living in this very small little shack in the woods. And the mother basically is inside cooking for her 5 boys. So you can imagine she's probably cooking up a storm. And she's very busy. And like, instead of saying anything, one of the youngest boys turns around and says, look, mother, look at what we've brought home. And the mother, without thinking, turns around and says, whatever it is, share it amongst yourselves.
Oh, no.
Now.
Oh, no.
5 brothers, mind you.
I mean, on the one hand, you can cast this in a really empowering way.
But they're like all brothers.
Right, but did she choose that? I mean...
She does it. She's in love with Arjun. She's completely in love with Arjun. He's the best warrior amongst all of them. So obviously she's in love with him. But because the mother has said this, and because mother's word is law according to scripture, they all end up married to Draupadi. She ends up with 5 husbands.
Oh, wow. Wow.
What a fascinating story.
Isn't it? Sorry, it took me a little bit of time because I had to like think about the things I needed to omit because it's such a huge, it's like a book which is this thick, right? And like there's the entire genesis of where the boys came from, and there's a huge story to their great grandfather, and like it's a lot.
Okay, how many generations back am I going to go in telling this story? Yeah.
Right. But this is like the gist of, like, it's a very basic gist of what basically happens. And then Draupadi is the one that ends up starting the Mahabharata, the big war, because she's disrespected by the court of cousins. Like, she's humiliated. So what she does is there's this very empowering thing. She opens up her hair and she lets it down. And she says, I will not tie my hair or wash my hair until I wash it in cord of blood.
Wow. I just got chills.
Yeah.
I will not tie it. I will not wash it until I wash it in cord of blood. And that is her revenge on her husbands, because her husbands didn't protect her when they were doing this, these 100 princes to her. I find her a very interesting character. There's a beautiful book called Palace of Illusions by Chitra Banerjee Devakarani. Beautiful book. And that is the story of the Mahabharata from Draupadi's perspective. If you're interested, that is a good book to read. So I'm sorry this story took so long to tell, but it is a very...
Oh no.
Oh, no.
We needed all of that.
I was telling Jen before we got into this, I was like, I would love to have some Hindu mythology on our podcast. I'm really glad that we got that in.
But this is she's very interesting. So Draupadi and Sita, they're the two mythological figures, and they're goddesses in their own right. Sita is a reincarnation of Lakshmi, who's like our goddess of wealth. If you read into it, you realize how much misogyny is there. The treatment of Draupadi in the story, and then the fact that everyone blames her for starting this war, without considering that she basically gets bartered away. Like, her first experience is her father being disappointed that she's a woman and therefore can't avenge him. Then she's basically like distributed amongst these 5 boys because the mother says so. And no one decides that is a bit of a strange thing to do.
Well, nobody pauses to ask her if that's what she wants.
No one asks her. No one asks her if that's what she's comfortable with. No one, because the mother is in the hierarchy most superior. So that's the person that they would listen to. And then finally, she is bartered basically because the oldest husband, Yudhishthir, has his vice is gambling.
Oh, this sounds like so much like what happened in like classical Greece and Rome. Like, if your husband had gambling decks, you would just be sold because he owned you and you had that's it.
Right. There's such a connection.
It's his debt is your problem.
Yeah. And this is also like where the system of dowry comes from, right? Like, you're basically, all of this money and cows and all sorts of things are sent along with you as almost like, your family is paying rent for you to live with your husband or something. It's the most ridiculous thing on the planet. And a lot of women have a very large dowry that men squander away. And then they start pressuring those women to get more money out of their families. It's a very, again, the problem is capitalism, but...
Right, yeah.
And no social safety net. So the thing that this reminds me of, Nikita, is going back to who's the Greek mythology version of this?
It's tax season, and at LifeLock, we know you're tired of numbers. But here's a big one you need to hear. Billions. That's the amount of money in refunds the IRS has flagged for possible identity fraud. Now here's another big number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, we'll fix it guaranteed. One last big number. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast for the threats you can't control. Terms apply.
So this idea of a woman being basically imposed upon and bartered away, and I don't know if there was any kind of an assault on her person involved in this, but...
Oh, yeah.
I was picking that up, this woman being assaulted as part of this and being so incensed and enraged, and her husband would not help her.
And they just watch.
And then she's the bad guy for fighting back. Everyone's blaming her for starting this war. Being the bad guy for fighting back is a tool of the patriarchy that you made me think about a lot when I was listening to your Live episode about when you were talking about Medusa and how she fights back because she was also assaulted, and then she's literally demonized. Literally.
Oh, yeah. So I do think the Medusa myth is very interesting because one way or the other, what essentially happens is, and this is like the most simple way to put it, is that Medusa is, I always look at her as someone who is colonized over and over again. Whichever version of, like, whether you believe Ovid's version where she gets sexually assaulted by Poseidon, or whether you believe that she was born a Gorgon, and men have just decided that they're going to go over and over and over and over again to like her cave to like try and kill her because they needed her head.
As a wedding present. Literally, her head is part of his mother's dowry, or to stop his mother from getting married to some random dude.
God, it is so unbelievably problematic. But like more than anything else, it's this poor woman. Whether she's a Gorgon or whether she's a woman, I always see the Gorgons as women anyway, because that's what they are. Like, and there's a whole poem about it. Like, are they really Gorgons, or were they just women who dared to stand up to the patriarchy and say no? And like, do their voices become shrieking? Do their appearances change into like, does their hair become snakes, those beautiful dresses that you want to possess? And there's a lot of punishing women and turning them into monsters in Greek mythology. Like there's like with Scylla, with Charybdis, there's so much of that.
Like women who stand up for themselves get monsterized, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Women standing up till this date and saying, no, this happened to me and I will not let you shut me down. Those kind of women are shut down over and over and over again. They're demonized, or loads of nonsense is put out into the press about them. The press itself will turn around and make up stories about it. It's very harmful.
This is why people don't want to come forward about sexual assault, because of this exact thing that is happening in these myths. It's a silencing tool. Oh my God, my mind is being blown right now.
It is a silencing tool. It is a silencing tool, and it is used specifically by the oppressors to keep the oppressed in our places. I say this with air quotes because I believe our places are everywhere. Not but it is something that is used over and over and over again. It's you see it in civil rights movements. Civil rights movements are demonized, because the biggest kryptonite that white supremacy has, like white supremacy's kryptonite, is like cross-racial solidarity. So we all stood up together, and that's the end of white supremacy for you. If every single race turned around and said, you can't treat black people like that, or you can't treat brown people like that, or we stand with indigenous communities, that's the end of white supremacy, isn't it?
There's the whole stratification of, like, in quotation marks, the good minority.
Right. The model minority myth.
Yeah, the positive stereotyping. It's just another way to other and create division amongst people who, if they all stood together, would have maybe a different outcome.
I see this in like the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of demonization of civil rights movements, and the way that in the US, the way that white supremacy works here is to frame it as a law and order thing. Oh, these people are just, lawless rioters. I mean, this was the narrative last summer, especially about the Black Lives Matter movement. And that, I think that's absolutely true. So you can say that this tool that we're finding here in the Greek mythology, it's a tool for suppression of voices, whether you are a woman or whether you are a minority who's been colonized and oppressed. It works equally on both of those intersections.
It does. And it's very interesting the way that you see it in mythology, and you see it in history, and you see it in fairy tales. Despite these being our oldest stories, people just refuse to admit that we have problems, that our society has been structured in a way that is still reflected. Like, honestly, why are these things still so relevant? They're still relevant because we haven't moved that far past them in the way that we think.
We haven't moved very far at all, according to, it was just a lot more bald back then. What's interesting about the Hindu mythology that you were talking about is you were saying that things were very veiled. The misogyny was veiled. And I can, as a totally uninformed white person who has absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, I feel like I picked that up a little bit because there were a lot of elements of the story you told her. I'm like, and if you look at it from this angle, it actually seems kind of empowering. Like, the mother's word is law. But then if you look at it from this angle, it's like, well, then that gets, this woman divided up between these men without her consent.
It's so much more complicated because she becomes property of all six of them. And one of them might have been a great husband, but one of them had a gambling debt. And therefore, she has to pay the price for the guy with the gambling debt. And the other husbands don't have any say.
Yeah, it's a very devastating story if you read it all the way through. And if you're a woman, you're with Draupadi all the way. But the way that it's told, it's not told like that in the story. The way that, like how when an abusive person tells the story of the person that they have abused, they will always portray themselves as a hero. Someone else's fault, that had to happen to her. Like, I put up this tweet about Medusa, and I shared it on my Instagram. And it basically, the tweet was, what is Medusa's story if not a tale of a woman going to the ends of the earth to be left alone and men showing up to piss her off anyway?
Yes, literally, she's like, I'm going to the writing cave. Just leave me alone.
That's it. Right. So I put up this tweet. And the thing is, like, I looked at it and I was like, she literally did that. She did not want to be seen by anyone ever again. She just wanted to go to her cave. And because she's mortal, I think she was just waiting for her death.
And the internalized bit of that, too, is like she thought she was too ugly to be seen by people ever again and unworthy of love. Like, that's the other thing to unpack about it now.
And what did all of these men do? They came and they basically showed her that everything that she believed there was right. They came there because she was a monster. She was scary. And they could like get something from her. Killing her became a game, the hero's game of who gets to kill the monster. I looked at that and I was like, here's a woman who has gone to the ends of the earth. And most women who kind of responded, because I think Medusa has a huge fan club now amongst women, because we really identify with her. There was a guy who must have found it because the algorithm kind of took Instagram post everywhere. And he was like, shut the fuck up. They needed her to kill the Kraken or some nonsense, some wrong mythology.
Kraken.
That's not Greek mythology, though. Like...
It's not, it's like, I'm like, that's no mythology. I'm not going to sit and explain to some like willfully ignorant, uninformed person. The way that they spoke about her there, I was like, they're basically saying the ends justify the means when it comes to women.
You can treat us however you want if you have a really good reason.
Yeah, if you have a really good reason, if it benefits a man's growth, a woman can be traumatized as much as the man wants, and we see it over and over again in our stories.
We started our season talking about sex work in ancient Athens. And in particular, the idea that, like, it's a very incel idea, but the idea that sex was a basic human right and therefore had to be democratic, like it had to be something everyone could afford. And the way in which men could treat women was appalling. The quotes that we found were, you could spit on a woman, she means nothing to you. Whatever you do to her doesn't matter. And it's like, this just makes me think back to, this is their mythology. This is the way they're treating women, most likely enslaved sex workers.
A lot of them foreign, not Greek.
A lot of them foreigners. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whatever you do to a woman, as long as you can justify it by what you need, whatever that is, and however loose your justification is, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, like that's it. Like it's we have a real problem. It's something which I saw a few years ago. There was a very well-known writer. It came out about that writer that he had basically traumatized a lot of women. And his justification, from what he wrote, the justification seemed to be, yes, but it helped my art and it helped me grow as a man. So isn't it okay to like, the things that I did, I don't feel bad for that reason, because it helped me grow.
As long as it leads to great art by a great man.
We also glamorize that idea.
It was a huge thing that came out. And he basically, it came out that his Pulitzer-winning novel, he had basically cannibalized one of his relationships where he really hurt the woman to write it. And it was the first time that it struck me so hard a few years ago that we are perfectly fine with men abusing women as long as it leads to the greater good.
And it's in the mythology and it's in the history. I was actually really curious about the intersection of Hindu and Greek mythology, which you mentioned earlier. Can you tell us a little bit about where they intersect? Do you think these two cultures informed each other in the ancient world and were kind of talking to each other?
Do you know, I think there was a lot of trade that happened. And I know for a fact that a lot of India, there were a lot of ports in India, just like there were a lot of ports in ancient Greece. There must have been a lot of trade going on, because we know that like ancient Greece was not one single homogeneous white. It just wasn't, because historically, like, there were loads of different kinds of people, different races. It was a big melting pot because of trade.
Because of trade of all things, including people, and because of wars. People have, for as long as we have existed, have gone to war against each other. And unfortunately, in the ancient world, and I'm not saying it's not true in the modern world, but in particularly in the ancient world, a consequence of losing a war meant losing your liberty and potentially being enslaved to the person who conquered your land and then being sent anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, like, at the end of the day, I just feel like there's a lot to unpack with all of this. And I do think there was a lot of, because there's a lot of similar stories between the Hindus and the ancient Greeks. And like, there's a lot of similarities in Greek mythology and Hindu. There's an entire book written by a mythologist called Devdutt Patnaik, all about the similarities between the Indian and the Greek gods, like the Hindu gods and the Greek gods and the similarities, and he's traced them really nicely. I think it's available on Amazon or anywhere. Basically, he's a very well-known mythologist, and it's very, very well written. And it also talks about, the queer stories that have essentially been straight washed. But one thing I do love about Hindu mythology is that gender is very fluid in Hindu mythology. All the male gods had female forms. You read about the male gods going off and having children with other male gods, in their female forms. It's very, very, very interesting. Vishnu's female form is one of the most well-known female forms amongst the gods, and that's Mohini, and she's very beautiful and very sensual and very so Vishnu really knows how to use his body as in his female form, and he has children with other gods, and it's all very interesting. There's so much to unpack, really.
It makes me want to, again, this is why when we covered Dionysus before, there's a period of time in Dionysus's travels where he goes to India and he starts a war over bringing wine to essentially the continent of India.
Oh my gosh, Jen, tell us this story.
There's not a lot I can tell you because I didn't do loads of research into it for a really good reason. I was like, there is a whole story about how these gods interacted that I actually want to look at. I'm going to look at this book that you just mentioned from a different view. I didn't want to just westernize it and make it the colonizer who gets together this army with war elephants and he goes to fight against the son of a fire god over why you would drink wine. But what I find interesting about Dionysus in particular of all the gods is he starts off in the mythology as incredibly fluid. He is sometimes a young guy. He's sometimes very feminine, very beautiful.
Isn't there a period in his life where he disguises himself as a woman?
Yeah, there is. And I wonder if there is something in his mythology and that fluidity that maybe intersects and has to do with maybe how his myth crossed paths with other mythologies and other people. Because a lot of time in Greek mythology, he's always said as he's come from the East, he's come from India, he's come from other places. So I'm really fascinated to see how they interconnect.
So there's two sides to this as well, that really bothers me. There are some people who will just turn around and someone who really irritates me turned around and said this the other day. They were like, well, all the Greek gods were stolen from Hindu myth or from Egyptian myth anyway, and I was just like, that's really lazy. That's a very lazy way to look at other people's mythologies. And I understand where that's coming from, from this person. But it's a lazy way to look at it because all of these things are valid. And you can't just turn around and say that all of these gods were stolen from. And it's the same with the Roman gods. I don't think the Roman gods were stolen from the Greek gods. I feel like what the Romans did was they came in, they saw, here are all of these gods. Oh, they're kind of similar to these other gods that we have. And what they did was they changed their gods to fit in with those gods. That's actually more of what happened. But there's this really lazy idea that, I don't like Roman mythology because it's just been ripped off from Greek mythology. There's a lot of exchange of stories which happened back in the day. And I think there's a lot of space to have conversations about all of it, because to not do that is not to think critically. And it's one of the things that pisses off historians very much, or anyone who has any kind of critical thinking, is that you can't just turn around and make a really lazy generalized statement like, oh, this was just stolen from this civilization. It's a real problem that I have with a lot of the discourse that is going on.
Yeah. I think one thing that it's easy to lose sight of is that people didn't live in a vacuum. All of these cultures were talking to each other and learning from each other and sharing stories around a fire or whatever and borrowing and being inspired by each other. It's not necessarily all oh, we were ripped off. I mean, some of it was. And some of it was a tool of colonization too. We see the Romans doing that, imposing their gods on different festivals and things in places that they colonized. So we don't want to lose sight of that either. I think that we see that what you said about Romans finding their gods and finding a Greek god and kind of making them over into the same thing, that kind of happened with Aphrodite and Venus. They had a Venus before they encountered Aphrodite, And when they encountered Aphrodite, they kind of combined them into something new that was Venus.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, all the stories have been told by poets, right? Like, and none of the poets agree with each other. None of them have been able to go, yes, this is the one true timeline. To quote Loki, this is the one true timeline of the Greek gods.
There is no one true timeline. Yeah, exactly.
No, exactly. So they are open-minded enough to treat the Greek gods like a multiverse. The same way, there's a bit of a multiverse when it comes to the Hindu gods. So each of the three murti, so Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, has their own book, and each one states that it was their god, their deva, who basically started the universe. The stories completely differentiate from each other, and it's very interesting. It really is. Because you're looking at it and you're kind of going, well, if they didn't agree on a single true timeline. So when people on the internet go, no, but that is not what happened to Medusa. This is what happened to Medusa. And I'm like, oh my God. Greek myth is a living thing. You can't turn around and say your version of the story is the only version of the story. You can say this is the version of the story I like best, but you can't like just choose to ignore all the other versions of the story.
The other thing to remember is everything about their religions weren't written down and codified in books. They were very fluid. So it allowed for people's beliefs and understanding of these gods and goddesses to change and develop and adapt as the civilizations adapt.
This whole thing about like the one true timeline, it really frustrates me about the discourse because it's very non-nuanced thinking. It's not, you can't engage with classics if you think like that. You just can't.
And a lot of times when you're telling a story for modern audiences, when we tell different bits of ancient history or mythology, we only have very few sources to work with. So we have to pick our way through sort of the landscape and say, the sources contradict each other here. Like when we were talking about Spartacus, like someone says this, someone says that. This is the incomplete source we have to work with. So I'm going to give you the narrative as best I can give it to you. But you wouldn't be wrong for saying I'm not 100% accurate. But I also have to tell you something that you can make sense of.
Exactly. You got to make choices like you would make choices in telling a story that you made up,
I mean, that is 100% true.
It's one of the problems with being able to write fiction about mythological character from Greek myth or even from Hindu myth. You have contradicting sources. So you have to pick the narrative you want to tell because you can't tell both narratives because they contradict each other. You can't, like in writing Great Goddesses, one of the things I had to do was I had to choose a narrative because I tried as much as I could to do both, right? Like I tried to give Zeus an out right at the beginning. I'm like, almost God boy, what would you choose? Would you choose power or would you choose a lifetime of love? But not being known. And he chooses wrong. He chooses wrong in my head every time. He chooses wrong in the sources every time. He chooses power. He always chooses power because that is Zeus's inherent nature. So there's like, I always connect this somehow to Doctor Who and like the Loki thing because Loki feels like a lost season of Doctor Who to me. I don't know if you guys have watched it.
I haven't, but I've seen fan fiction that combines Loki and Doctor Who, and I'm very interested in this combination.
The Marvel TV show is very much in line with what Doctor Who is all about. It's about timelines and fixed events. And fixed events is something very interesting to me because there are places where all of the poets seem to agree. Where it's like, okay, there was a goddess called Aphrodite. Whether she was born like this or whether she was born like this, she existed and she was the goddess of love. So it's all very interesting to me how there are certain things that so in Zeus's nature, he will always choose power over love.
Like you can look at Greek mythology as a Doctor Who episode where the timeline is just a tangled web, but there are certain fixed events.
Yeah, so those are like fixed events. Like there are some things that make sense because that is the inherent nature of those gods.
This has been so amazing. This has been just the best conversation ever. I have had so much fun talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Me too.
It's been a delight. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this and I can't wait to like meet up with you guys again. Like ...
Absolutely. We have a Patreon. You should definitely look into that because ...
To be determined. We will be in touch. So where can people find you online, Nikita?
So you can find me on Instagram. It's at Nikita_Gill, or you can find me on Twitter, where I do a lot of my activism work, digital activism work via Twitter, and I find out a lot via Twitter. So it's at NKTGill on Twitter. Or just read my books. I'd love it if everyone just read my books.
You'll cry in the chair at the hairdressers, and it'll be awkward and amazing and wonderful.
Yeah.
So when we drop this in February, are you going to have a book that you want to plug that will have come out?
Actually, you know what? I think my last, the book that I really always want to plug is The Girl and the Goddess, because that's my first novel in verse. And because we've spoken so much about Hindu myth in this episode, that book it covers Hindu myth in a way that anyone can understand it, So if you're new to Hindu myth, that is a good book to read, because the goddesses will tell the character the story, and therefore will tell you their story. And it's told in a way that, you can feel really involved in it. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really excellent and really heartbreaking and beautiful and fiery. And I loved it and will continue to love it and highly recommend it.
Thank you.
Thanks again. And to our audience, we will see you whenever we see you next. Probably next week. This is the end of the season. I have to look at a calendar.
All right.